All right, I just recorded this whole thing and then realized I didn't hit record. So let's try this again. My plan is to not really make this a big fancy thing, not really edit it. So you're gonna kind of see me as I am when I'm just kind of sitting here. I didn't put on a clean shirt. This is covered in cat hair. I didn't clean up my office. I didn't brush my hair. Like, this is just me. I wanted you to be able to get a look at microscopes with me before the microscopy badge coming up, because I know that buying a microscope is like a really big decision, and really overwhelming, even for me, because there's so many different choices out there and there's so many different price points. Like, you could get a microscope for $20, you can microscope for $2,000. What do you need to get? So when you're thinking about what microscope to get, the most important thing is your budget. Now, some people say, well, like there's all different prices. Decide what you're going to spend first, and then we'll talk about what kind of microscope you're getting. Because if you want to go budget, go budget. There's a lot of good options nowadays. So if $20 is your budget, do $20. If $200 is your budget, do $200. I'd recommend one of those two. Like, I try not to go for like 80 because there's not a lot of good options in the $80 range. But choose your budget first. If you can't afford something expensive, or if you're not sure that your kid's going to stay interested, don't spend a lot of money. This could be, a great experience with a $20 microscope. Really, truly, I'll show you in a second. So once you've decided your budget, the next thing to do is talk about and think about, what are you going to use it for? So is it something that you're going to be looking mostly at, like bugs and flowers and leaves? You might want what's called a stereo microscope. Stereo microscopes are also called dissecting microscopes, and they're kind of like magnifying glasses, only there's like two pieces and you're looking in 3 dimensions. So they should have a good light source, and they should have 2 lenses, and should be able to see everything really well. It'll be open underneath so you can like mess with stuff. So those are really nice for younger kids, or for kids who are not interested in super microscopic stuff, but maybe just small stuff. They are great for seeing bugs up close, and flowers up close, and leaves up close, and all the things that, when you see them really close up, you're like, whoa, I can't believe that's what it actually looks like. Stereo microscopes are great for that. If you have all the money in the world to spend and you have lots of space in your house, get both. I don't actually, so we don't have a stereo microscope anymore. We had one when my kids were younger, and then I switched for a compound microscope because we don't have space for both. And now at this point I have a really nice compound microscope, but it's because I'm a doctor and because I teach this stuff. And honestly, we don't use my nice compound microscope as much as we use some other things. So I'll show you some other options here in a minute. Okay, so compound microscopes, I keep throwing that word around. That's the kind most people think of as a microscope. Like, you put a slide in it and you like look at it. There's a light coming up. You can see what's on the slide. Now, if you're going to do that kind of microscope, you have some more choices to make. So first of all, if you're going budget, this is a great option. Now, my mom found this. It clips onto a cell phone. She found this years ago, and it's honestly the microscope I use the most. It's not a full-on microscope the way you might think it is. It clips onto my phone and uses the camera on my phone and then the magnifying lens on there. I can use it with slides. We use it to look at onion cells. We use it to look at food. We use it to look at all sorts of microscopic stuff. Pond scum, whatever. Now, you can't go as zoomed in as you would with a fancier microscope, but it's really easy. It's like right there. I don't have to get it out. I don't have to set it up. It's just like, do it. And I can just hand it to my kids. I don't feel like, oh, I need to like watch them. If it breaks, it was $10. So I can always get another one. And frankly, it's lasted for years and it hasn't broken yet because there's not a lot of working parts there to mess up. So if you are looking for like budget, you can actually, don't worry about it. This is great. It has a light. So you're able to see what you're doing, and you're able to see a lot of things. Now, you want to go a step up from that, you can get a fold scope. So a fold scope was actually invented so that scientists and doctors around the world have a microscope, because in a lot of places they don't have microscopes, partly because the microscope itself is expensive and partly because they don't have electricity. So the fold scope was invented because it's folded up from paper. You can see it's like really fancy origami, and it opens up here, and you can use just a regular slide, microscope slide, and it kind of slides around so you can look at different parts of the slide. And with the fold scope, you use the sun. So you like hold it up to the sun as your light. This is used by scientists and doctors all over the world. It is a perfectly adequate microscope. And it's used to diagnose malaria. It's used to save lives. There is nothing wrong with a fold scope. Now my fold scope I bought pre-assembled. I would recommend putting out the extra $3 or whatever it to have someone else fold it for you. As you can see, it's rather complicated, and like it's not, you could figure it out. You know, it all kind of slides here, but I decided not to do that, and I'm really glad I did. So I would recommend the one that's already put together. So those two, if you're going budget, great. You're gonna have a great microscope experience with those. Now, if you want to spend more money and get like a real microscope, I'm going to talk about some more things to consider here in just a minute. But I'm going to pause for a second and talk about microscope slides. So I have so many sets of like random slides just because anyone who has them and doesn't want them anymore, they're like, hey, Robin probably wants slides. So I just have like all these slides, and they're great. They're especially useful if you're going to be doing like a particular study of something. So like, if you're learning about earthworms and you have a cross-section of an earthworm, that's great. They're not great for inspiring kids to be enthusiastic about microscopy, is my experience. Because the problem with it is they're kind of static. They just kind of sit there. And especially nowadays, kids can just go online and see the same thing. Now, when I was a kid, we had to go to the library, get a book, if they even had one. So it was at least something we couldn't see anywhere else. But still, it was really static, and I wasn't super impressed when I was a kid. What is very impressive is what you can do with these things. So, blank slides. So this slide has nothing on it yet, maybe some fingerprints. It looks like my child may have smudged this one. You should only hold slides from the edges. This is glass. The glass slides shatter into a million shards. Do not get glass slides if you have small children in your house. Now, I have a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old. We only use glass slides because they are better. There's a lot more you can do with them. You can heat them up. You can really see through them quite well. But they do shatter into like a million little sharp pieces. So small children and glass slides do not mix. For slides, you're also going to need cover slips. You also see them listed as cover glass. Those are also typically glass. Sorry, this is really hard to open. They're very confusing because the way these packages usually work is there'll be a box with a tall lid. So it goes like that. And so I can't tell you how many times in my life I've opened one of these things upside down. So that's how they come out. Oh, I should show you what they are. So this is a cover slip. These are also glass, and these are shattered in even smaller bits. So all of this stuff, if you throw it away, should be wrapped in paper. What we usually do is we tape it to a piece of cardboard and then throw it away so we don't have pokey bits of glass coming through. So if we're doing a lot of it, we'll have like a plastic detergent or bleach bottle that we use as our sharps container. So that's how you work with those. The point of the cover slips is you put something on your microscope slide and then you smush it. You put the cover slip on top. Now you don't actually push on it. You never touch them with your fingers because fingerprints like totally ruin the view. But the cover slip you just drop on top, and it kind of might slide around a little bit if it's wet there, but it'll keep everything in the same plane of view. Because the thing is, you're trying to magnify it, and if it's like this tall, it'll be different magnification. Like you'll have to go back and forth through it. Even this flat, you'll be surprised how much you have to kind of go up and down to see different layers. So that's why I use a cover slip. And generally with a microscope slide, you're going to use a cover slip. The pre-prepared ones usually will have a cover slip on them, like kind of glued on already. So those are those things. I use those kinds of slides way more because you can put literally anything on them. And it's so much fun. Like that's what microscopes are really fun for, in my opinion, is all the other stuff out there. Bread mold, cheese mold, bits of food, hair. Oops, someone's coming in. So it's these slides that are so much fun. So the pre-prepared slides, like I said, they're static. They just kind of sit there. But these slides, you can put literally anything on. And that, in my opinion, is the fun of microscopy. So bread mold, cheese mold. I don't know why mold is like a total favorite with me. The gunk in your drains, really gross, but very cool. Swiping different things people touch. Bathrooms actually tend to be very clean, very disappointing because we clean them. Look for places you don't tend to clean. Those are the really gross ones with like germs and stuff. Pond scum. Water from the gutter has all sorts of interesting things in it if you have gutters with like rainfall and things in it. Any standing water in your backyard. Anything on your body. You can swab your cheek. I like tooth scrapings. They're nice and gross. There's all sorts of stuff, like wait until the end of the day when you haven't brushed your teeth since the morning and then scrape off some of that stuff with a toothpick and spread that on a slide. That's pretty gross. It's really cool. Or even like in your eyebrows or in your nose or some hair. I mean, our body makes stuff, right? So look at it under a microscope. Animal things, looking at animal hair compared to human hair, super interesting in my opinion. There's just so many things you can look at. And when you start looking at the real world and comparing things, it just opens up this whole other level of microscopy. So for that, if you have a kid who's going to be really into that, it is worth getting a microscope. There's a lot more you can see and a lot more you can do with it. I'm going to pause this video. Like I said, I don't know if I said this before, I'm not planning on editing this really. I mean, we might cut out, like my son just interrupted here for a minute. We'll cut out that. But I'm just going to pause this, grab my microscope, and then show it to you. So you have a little bit better idea of the things I'm looking for when I get a microscope, because I bought this as a business expense. So I got like my dream microscope. And I'll tell you honestly, I still only spent like $400, and I bought this for my practice. So as a doctor. So this was my fancy doctor microscope, and I was not spending $1,000 on it. If I was doing it just for my family, I would not even bother getting some of the features I have on this. So I'll tell you which those are in just a second. Let me go grab my microscope. All right, this thing weighs a ton. First of all, this is huge. So doctor office microscope, right? You don't need anything this big. This was, the reason I got such a large one was partly because it was on sale. And so I got it. It was usually a couple $100 more. And they were doing, it was like a new model coming out. So I got a bigger one because it was cheaper than the smaller one. And then partly because I knew my plan was this was going to be the rest of my life microscope. So it used to be, nowadays a lot of doctors don't own microscopes, but it used to be doctors would own a microscope and that would be the microscope for the rest of their life. So the microscope I had up until this one was the rest of life microscope for a doctor who retired, and he'd bought it back in the 1970s, which is before I was born, and it was perfectly adequate. It worked just fine. But I figured if I was going to have a microscope for the rest of my life, I wanted a few more bells and whistles on it. So this is my rest of my life microscope. The one that I had before is actually with my practice. So I bought this for my practice. And then when I sold my practice, I switched microscopes because I brought home the older one when I got this one. But then I sold my practice at the beginning of COVID to take care of my kids. And I was like, I'm keeping the good microscope. So the person who bought my practice is still using that 1970s microscope. It's perfectly adequate for everything that she needs. And it was perfectly adequate for me for years too. I wanted to get a cool microscope, and I was a doctor, so I had an excuse. So let me show you some parts here on this microscope. So I'll tell you what's extra and what's necessary. So first of all, I'll tell you what's extra. This thing has a third eye. So what's cool about a third eye is my kids can be looking in here, and then I can look in there and see what they're looking at, and so I can help them. Totally unnecessary, but a very cool feature. I used actually this a lot in my practice. As a doctor, I used my microscope mostly for fun because I really wanted kids to feel comfortable at the doctor's office. So I'd have them play with all the equipment and we'd look in the microscope, stuff like that. Something else here that's totally optional, this rotates. So that's kind of handy. So I can rotate it around when I'm teaching. And again, I use this for teaching, use this with kids. So totally optional for you, really nice for me. Having these adjust so that they're different distances apart is nice. I'd say that's also optional, but less optional. Like if that's a feature, that's a nice feature to have because our eyes are not all the same distance apart. And one problem I've had, my face is built very small. Like I've heard from my dentist my whole life, whatever dentist I had, the first thing they always say is like, wow, you have a really small mouth. And I'm like, thanks. And also my eyes are very offset from each other. I hear that from my eye doctor all the time. Like, wow, your eyes are really crooked. And I'm like, thanks. So I have a much nicer time with microscopes I can adjust. The first, I don't know, through high school, I always just looked through one side or the other. I actually could never see through both sides at once, which kind of drove me a bit batty. Oh, which two of these, you don't need two. That's definitely an optional thing. I personally like it a lot. I have a much better experience with it myself, but again, optional. If it's a feature of the microscope you're looking at, that's great. Totally optional. All right, so those are the optional things. Now let me tell you the absolutely necessary things. One thing is a light. So I can't turn it on. It's not plugged in, obviously. But some microscopes have a little mirror underneath here that you kind of tip and use sunshine or the lights in your house. Don't get that. Total, like that microscope will be a waste of money. A lot of the like $20 on Amazon type microscopes, that's what they have. Don't do it. If you're going to spend $20, get the fold scope or get the one that clips on your phone. You'll have a much better experience. It's really hard to direct that light correctly. I personally, as an adult who knows how to use a microscope, it drives me nuts when I've tried to help like neighbors or whatever. Of course, I don't say like, "Oh, you wasted your money on this one." Like I try to help them, but it's really frustrating. So I can only imagine for kids how frustrating it is. Don't do it. Another, I would say not 100% necessary, but I personally will not buy a microscope without it. I'm going to flip this around here. So this thing where you put the slides, this is called a stage. So I have a mechanical stage here. So what that means is when I turn this, I don't know if you can see it's moving. See how it's moving around? So when you're trying to look at something on a slide, the slightest little motion moves the whole world by like miles because, you know, you're zoomed in so much with the microscope. So a mechanical stage, if you can afford it, get a mechanical stage. It's a game changer because then you can very carefully slide around on the slide and find what you're looking for. Or you can follow, if something's creeping or swimming or whatever, you can follow it along the slide really easily. The other thing is that the heat from the light, if you get an incandescent bulb, which this microscope, I can't even remember now if it has incandescent or LED. I'm pretty sure it has incandescent. Nowadays, a lot of them come with LED, but the incandescents get hot, and that heat will actually make the liquid on your slide move. So what you're looking at will move, which is totally fine. Like that's what I've always used, unless this is LED, which I can't remember. So being able to follow it smoothly is really helpful. Another thing that I would not do without at this point is the fine and coarse adjustments. So when you're adjusting the microscope, I'm not going to do it while I'm holding it by the microscope because I'm obviously not treating this the way your kids should treat their microscopes. This is the coarse adjustment and this is the fine focus. So what that means is you use the coarse one to get in the general vicinity of where you're trying to see something, and then use the fine one to do more specific focus. Again, not 100% necessary, but I personally would not buy a microscope without that. I would rather have something smaller and cheaper, like a fold scope in my case. If you have a kid who's very dexterous and they're going to be able to very smoothly turn the focus knob themselves, you don't need that. I personally am not. And so even though I'm like really good at a lot of things, that motion, even before I had my strokes, those of you who don't know, I had strokes about 10 years ago. Now I'm really not good at it. But even before my strokes, like I was super good at a lot of things. Like I do beautiful joint injections. I do beautiful stitches. I knit. And that motion, I just could not, I'd always skip over what I was trying to get to. So that's just me personally. But again, a frustration for me. So those are the things I'd be looking for, is the mechanical stage, the fine and coarse adjustments that are really, really smooth. So look at the reviews and make sure that you can easily focus, and then having a light, incandescent, LED, whatever. LEDs are nice because you don't burn yourself. I have on some microscopes, not burned like seriously, but like it's hot, right? Because incandescent bulbs get hot. But that's not a huge deal, but it's something to think about. Like you said, I don't even know which one I have on here, and that's totally fine with me. Now this has a bunch of other features. The third eye is nice because I can put a camera on it. Besides teaching, I have multiple different lenses and eyepieces and just a lot of other stuff I can do with it. Filters are nice if someone gets really into it. So this part here is a filter. If you have a kid who you think is going to stick with it, you can sometimes buy these that you can add filters later, or you can get it with a filter. That just lets you have different looking light to look at different things. A lot of the videos you see online where you're seeing really cool things under a microscope, they're using a filter. That's how they're making it look so cool. It's not that way because, their microscope is super good. I mean, it is super good, but because they're using a filter. So those are the things I would think about when you're getting a bigger, fancier microscope. Like I said, this big, totally unnecessary. Some of these features, totally unnecessary. But there's a few things there that really make a difference. The other thing is make sure you know where you're going to store it. Like, this lives in my office and that works. So like I wouldn't, if I didn't have kids and this wasn't my job, I definitely would not get one. I'm sorry, if I did have kids, but this wasn't my job, I would not get one this big because this is a huge nuisance to store because it's huge. But it was in my office and my medical office. And of course, it had a place there. And then there was a little time where I was like, I didn't know what I was going to do when I grew up. And then I figured out I was teaching. And so now it's here on my desk. And so I have like this is a very small room. It's 6 feet by 12 feet, 6 feet by 10 feet. But this whole wall is just a desk, the whole length of 10 feet or 12 feet. So I have room for a microscope. But otherwise, I don't know where I'd put it. If you're going to be having to get it out and put it away and get it out and put it away, measure your cupboard ahead of time and make sure it fits. Because these things don't fold down. They're very inconvenient. And if this is not something that's going to sit out all the time, you're going to want to be able to put it away somewhere. So have a plan for that before you buy it. And this is just a mom to mom thing. I can't tell you how many things I've gotten and I'm like, oh, I don't know where we're going to keep this now. So plan ahead on that one. All right, so that's everything I would think about. I may think of other things and put them in the blog post or something, but those are the big things when you're thinking about buying a microscope for your family that you want to consider. If you have other questions, of course, you can message us. Jill knows all about microscopes too. She can probably answer most of them herself. But if not, she'll, of course, ask me and we'll get back to you. But I'm looking forward to seeing everyone for the microscopy badge. And we're going to have some fun projects. Like I have a whole bunch of stuff for people. So it's gonna be a fun thing. I had originally started to plan this as a class and then I made it into a badge and eventually we're gonna be doing it as a class. But for now, it's gonna be a badge. Lots of stuff we're gonna be doing with it. So I look forward to seeing everyone at the microscopy badge, or if you're watching this 2 years from now, during the summer, we have badges available. So join us the next time there's a summer badge. We'll have the microscopy badge available again.